This video is sponsored by War Thunder. My community has been going berserk over Khazan, while I'm here thinking it's a better Neo, which is a worse Neo 2. But even a worse Neo 2 is a guaranteed fun time once you get the hang of it, and as far as the boss design goes, I think Khazan devs did a respectable work. Work that continues beyond just the game's launch, so there's a good chance some of my complaints will have been addressed by the time you watch this. But going with what currently is in the game, they'll be ranked in tiers going from awful up to amazing. And while we avoid awfulness in its most dogshit form, we do have one absolute snooze fest of a boss to talk about. Hismar. I hate to say it, but once more we have a dragon boss that tends to drag on. It needs to be scaled down. And that's why it's at the tail end of this ranking and it's not even close. Boom! I just did a better combo than anything Hismar has in his toolkit.
It's over. It's all over.
The fight reminds me of a typical Souls-like hit the head or else shitty camera dragon fight, only without taking into consideration how it would function in Khazan, which again is a Neo-like with heavy emphasis on the player moveset and how it can interact with the enemy. But here the emphasis is flipped to be on the boss's moveset while you wait for your chance to punish every once in a while. And the boss's moveset just isn't worth the switch in emphasis for me. It just claw swipes, slams, more claw swipes, more slams. Phase 2 does a little better mixing in area denials, and I'd like to see more of that, and stuff that helps differentiate combos from one another. As is, there's not much engagement required from you. The attacks are very predictable, easy to read, so you just stand there and parry or dodge until he's done. Intuitive animations are good, but with nothing else to do while countering them, I think it gets quite dull. Not a fan of how Hismar gives you head either. A quicker slam results his head being stuck in the ground far longer than one where he flies up in the sky before ramming it into the earth with his full body weight, and his pullout game is pretty crazy with it going from stuck to now you take damage in an instant, requiring memorization. And fuck the notion of slotting anything from this boss into my memory banks, he doesn't belong there. For being such a massive figure in the backstory of Khazan, he feels about as significant as the tutorial boss, Yetuga, who is number 15 and mediocre tier. Complexity-wise, I will give it to Hismar over Yetuga, he does have more brewing there. But neither is cooking, and a tutorial boss has more leeway for that as he's meant to ease you into the combat of the game. In that regard, he did okay. After this encounter, I felt more comfortable with parrying, dodging, as well as loading in my own assaults in between. But also less excited for the fights to come, because this wasn't all that promising. As a boss removed from its introductory context, he's as generic as they get in visual design, music, and attacks. You'd be forgiven for experiencing a little bit of deja vu. I'm sure you've fought something nearly indistinguishable from this before. I do like a couple attacks, such as the Frost Breath that requires positioning behind him, as well as a combo that has a double attack as its finishing move, as in it requires consecutive instant deflects to counter. Although I find it odd that they introduced that idea here and then completely throw it away for the rest of the game. There's cool shit you can do with attacks that require deflect spam in my opinion. Number 14 Shactuka is in decent tier, but honestly he's quite lucky to be there. Again, complexity wise this boss is behind Hismar and not much ahead of Yetuga, so why would I rank it higher than both? Well, I think it takes better advantage of being a Khazan boss by having burst attacks and allowing you to go all out with your combos. Your offense is allowed to shine as much as ever, and depending on how you've built Mr. Khazan, it might just be fun enough on its own, which helps to distract from how run-of-the-mill Shactukas are. That said, while the animations are used for rather lame attacks, I will give them credit for having more personality in the unnatural movements. Its way of moving is very distinct from something like Yetuga, and I like the split face tiger thing he's got going, very handsome. But moving on from the lackluster non-humanoids, we have a yes-humanoid, Kraven the Hunter, aka Rangkus. He's a big boy with a big boy club that doubles as a ranged weapon, and triples as a flamethrower, and oh boy does it shit me up in the buffed up refight. Most bosses have a side mission variant of them, but in pretty much every case I prefer the original context. So as frustrating as Brinkus was, we're gonna pretend he doesn't exist. Although easier, Rangkus still has pretty absurd damage considering this footage here is with endgame stats and armor, and he's a fairly early game boss. While he's slower than average, he has pretty wonky animations and offbeat timings to attacks that aren't always intuitive. It's kinda 50-50, so you can't rely on either approach until you've learned him thoroughly. Also, he has a notably fast burst attack, a mechanic I'm well versed with from Neo 2. These are unblockable attacks that require a specific parry input to counter, and countering them lets you turn the tables on the boss and give him hell. It's a very satisfying mechanic when done right, and there are instances in other games where it's been gruesomely butchered. I'm happy to report that they're great in Khazan, where often they come after a significant delay and a just readable enough tell for the release, or a charge where you have a clear visual for when to counter. But again, for Rangkus, it's just a quick poke and he barely uses it. Not much fun is to be had with him. The presentation isn't memorable, the soundtrack is the kind of generic, incoherent, loud epic choir nonsense I hate, and he's not alone in having it. At least Phase 2 has some funny looking attacks and positioning requirements, attacks you can only dodge, not parry, which is something I'll be happy to talk more about with number 12, Trokka. There are quite a few spellcaster chicks from Ozma's harem, and I find her the least appealing as I think just about every spell of hers is a worse version of what later ones have. Most of hers boil down to just 3 things coming at you one after another with the same timing. Her melee is quite feeble and lacking, her GTFO move is slower, more pace-breaking than comparable attacks from later foes, she can easily be staggered out of many of her actions, and her ultimate was annoying as fuck to figure out. If you don't have enough stamina to dodge all of it, there is a mechanic that ensures you're not screwed, but it's not at all well communicated. So far it's been made abundantly clear. Jellyfish are not friends. Stay away from them. Yet, during this move, a blue one spawns and getting close to it won't damage you, but rather boosts your stamina. Not only does it go against the information you've been given, but also it doesn't really make sense. Why would she summon one that helps you? Why would it help you? What is his agency here? And worse yet, with her ultimate being so attention demanding, it's unlikely you'll scout the arena for different colored jellyfish, and then make this assumption of them being friends, or even notice the stamina boost. Personally, my eyes were fixed on her, and I only used my peripheral vision to determine where the jellyfish were so I could stay away from them. It's a shame because I think it's kind of an interesting attack otherwise and does a good job making Khazan a true dodge and deflect hybrid instead of one being a vastly superior option. Something that applies to a lot of her and other mages' abilities as well. I didn't find her fun really, but she's fine enough to be decent tier and maybe a low tier waifu. Comparatively, number 11 Princess Ilyna is a much more imposing melee fighter, but perhaps too much so. Overall, I think Khazan has really intuitive animations, ones that don't require trial and error memorization to figure out how to deflect most of them. Yet, Ilyna brings me back to the low points of Lies of P with attacks where I might as well not even look at the boss once she starts a combo and just go based on memory or guesswork alone. I imagine rapiers are harder to animate fairly since from your point of view a thin pointed blade is just a dot. Depth perception is gonna be lacking, you know. That alone would be tricky, but then you add in the fact that she's too short to be clearly visible behind Khazan's back, which along with all the particle effects blocks most of the view of her. That's why human bosses, even when it doesn't really make sense, tend to be taller than the player character. A way around this would be something like the flash she does before charging at you. Other than that, I straight up hate this part of the fight. It was so fucking annoying, I was ready to dump her in F tier slums. Fortunately, she brings out her spellcaster moveset in Phase 2 and leaves the rapiering in the backbone for now. She again puts heavy emphasis on dodging as well as positioning with lingering effects from her spells. Ideally, you don't just dodge, but also run to mislead the slower moving projectiles. Her arena-spanning Chaos Orbs are a fun ultimate too, with how your eye needs to be on not just the boss, but where her summoning spell lands. It's too bad she eventually reverts back to melee and the rapiering recommences. At least the chaos-infused attacks are a cool addition, which along with the music and the theater crowd appearing in Phase 2, elevates her to being an overall fine fight. Presentation matters quite a bit, I want my action looking cool, which is why I want to talk about the sponsor of today's video, War Thunder. Indeed, graphically, this game holds up to today's standards, which tends to be a struggle for games that strive for realistic presentation. If you're into tanks, jets, or just blowing stuff up with style, you should definitely check it out. It's a free-to-play game where you can hop into over 2,500 different vehicles, from old-school biplanes and World War II tanks to modern jets and helicopters. It covers like 100 years of military tech, so there you go, history nerds. Enjoy that. You can fight on land, in the air, or at sea. The matches are fast, intense, and honestly kind of addictive. Now, I'm planning to go on a trip to Norway next month, so if I want portable death and destruction, I can carry it with me in my pocket. See, on top of being on PC and consoles, it comes with a mobile version on Android and iOS, without losing the precise controls or graphics in the process. So whatever your summer plans are, don't miss out on War Thundering, and get yourself a hardy free bonus pack that includes vehicles, boosters, and all sorts of goodies for PC and consoles, for new and returning players that haven't played in 6 months. You know where to find the link, just scroll down a bit for the description or pinned comments. Now back to where we left off at number 10, which is Elamein. Like Princess Ilyna previously, she is U-sized, but unlike Ilyna, she's full melee focused. Strangely enough though, I found her easier to read than letters on a cereal box. Her sword slashes tend to be more exaggerated and appear to the side of your character instead of being blocked out of view. Instead, her strength lies in her defensiveness. Unlike other shield-carrying enemies, you can't break her block with heavy attacks. You have to either maneuver behind her or deflect, or do a little bit of both, which I did and found decently satisfying. On the one hand, she has a tendency to be a little too passive behind it, but on the other it encouraged footwork in a way no other boss did, and her blocks and counterattacks made her more interactive than, say, Hismar or Shactuka. And she still lets you do your usual Khazanisms, as she doesn't immediately restore her defense once it let down. In fact, she falls pretty hard to spear, so I think now would be a good time to mention how your choice of weapon can massively change the experience. I find dual wield and greatsword require a lot more thought and build prep, while with spear, all you need is trance. Every boss in this game is transphobic. This game is so goddamn woke, none can stand against trans. I think it borders on making your offensive output mindless, but at the same time, I never really found the other two weapons more fun to use, so I stuck with it. At number 9, we've got Volbaino. Oh dear. This would otherwise be a very dull one-note opponent for its repetitive attack patterns of slam, 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 slam. SLAM! If it wasn't for the fire element heating things up and forcing you to either always dodge, or preferably, parry non-fire attacks and dodge the rest. Again, reinforcing the dodge-parry hybrid combat. But I also think Khazan once again kind of fails in communication, as I don't think it was ever made clear what you can determine to be parryable and what isn't. If it was as simple as all non-pure physical attacks were unparryable, that would be one thing. But some elemental attacks can be parried, even shit like explosions at times, so there doesn't seem to be much of a consistent logic to it, you just have to go case by case. But in the context of Volbaino on its own, it's great. I like the animations too and how much they took advantage of the blacksmith theme. It kind of feels like an MMO boss with all the AoEs and arena swapping gimmick. But a good kind of MMO boss, one that still works well enough for one-on-one. Number 8, Aratra is responsible for my most shameful gaming moment of 2025. From what I hear, most seem to think this is an easy as shit forgettable boss. A guy I know accidentally no-hit it on his second playthrough, and he's a shit gamer. Now me on the other hand, a god gamer, I was stuck on this boss for like 3 hours at least. In my defense, alright, I only had 4 kills at the time and I thought its weak spot was its ass. Which it is, but it's kind of a trap. You don't want to spank it, you want to focus on his front legs as they can eventually break for huge damage. And that's where I have a problem with the design. I think the weak spot is poorly communicated and misleading, with the legs being the most heavily armored looking part of its body, all while its ass is calling for you. I may be stupid for falling for it, but I place some of the blame on its alluring butt. Stupid sexy Aratra. That said, I like how breaking the legs affects the fight, limiting its moves and the boss having to adjust to using attacks only doable with the body parts it's got left. I think that's straight up really cool, and the moveset on top of that is solid, with a surprising amount of combo mix-ups and dodge-only attacks. It's not a very memorable boss presentation-wise, it makes me look back on Violet Spider with more appreciation for how well that one was animated, and it's not very fun. But I can't find a strong enough reason to not put it in good tier when it has this much appreciable stuff going for it. Number 7, Bellerian has even more going for her, and is fun on top of it, but it's infuriating how close they got to truly top tier shit, and honestly they'd have it without even adding anything. It's just uneven in its pacing and balancing. She's not only a spellcaster, but a summoner as well, becoming a roided up Renala from Elden Ring, as well as being a better Trokka in her own right. The summons and her comboing attacks with them is the best part of the fight, with her focusing on doing spells you can avoid without keeping lock-on on her, making it so her presence still matters but doesn't contradict how you have to switch focus. I think that's fantastic. But one of those summons being a whole other boss you fight solo for about a minute or so feels a little out of place, especially when she can resummon him and damaging him does nothing to progress the real fight. On top of that, Bellerian is a devout member of the Church of RNGesus. She can protect herself with a blue magic shield that has a brief cast time that can be interrupted by hitting her. However, with her being able to teleport and summon other enemies, sometimes that's just not going to be possible. Then on top of the teleporting, shielding and summoning, she's pretty good at keeping you off from her with AoEs and slowly chasing skulls that darken your view upon touch. As such, it's hard to find a good flow without either extending the fight for absurd lengths or just trading damage so you don't have to refight the Grim Reaper once he's out of cooldown. It's another one of those soups that have all the best ingredients in the world, but they didn't stir. So sometimes you're eating nothing but stock, and other times you have all the best parts at once. Number 6 Viper is a Hismar simp, yet presentation-wise he feels more significant, more epic, and just has overall more Chad aura. While he's said to possess the power of the giant dragon, in reality the only thing they have in common is a boatload of health. For an early game boss especially, this is a brutal battle of endurance, and you won't progress the game until you have a good understanding of the fight, which is more than you have been asked of before. I really like the look of the arena both before and after Viper goes full monster, and the coolest part of the fight is when you're engulfed in darkness while he's hunting you down with leaping attacks. Music fades out and leaves you with only the brilliant sound design of Khazan, and it really accentuates the action. So a very memorable encounter, but I'd be lying if I said it's a complex, mechanically rich duel. No notable mix-ups or combo extensions, most attacks are blockable, and phase 2 slows down the pace instead of amping it up. But I also have no flaws to point out, so that's refreshing. That won't be a trend going forward, because right off the bat for number 5, I gotta say, Maluca's healing mechanic sucks. He can enter a stance where he instantly starts regaining health, and fast, requiring a heavy attack to stagger him out of it. And the problem with heavy attacks is that they typically aren't quick enough to make the exchange equal or beneficial to you. He more often than not does it after first successfully staggering you, so in those instances I can't call it bullshit, even if it is a harsh punishment and its impact depends on your weapon. But it's also a move he can just pull out of his ass randomly to extend the fight without you being at fault for the loss in progress. In addition, he's one of the more scripted fights, always starting the fight with the same move, starting phase 2 with the same move, starting phase 3 with the same move, and having lackluster combo variations. That said, his hefty, well-telegraphed big double greatsword swings and sheath attacks in his emo phase are some of the most satisfying attacks to deflect in the entire game for me for the animations, sounds, and just coolness factor. Which ends up being lessened by giving the same moveset to Guido, whoever the fuck that is, whose visual design doesn't at all fit the aesthetics of the fight, but again, ignoring the side mission refights. The plague-peddling lanky coffin man Skalpel, however, is too unique of an opponent for even this game to manage to repackage as another character. I'ma be real, I don't think visually Khazan really does it for me on average. Levels typically only consist of one color palette. Actually, that's not a palette, that's just a color. Usually brown or grey, and that extends to the boss fights as well. Trokka, Viper, and Skalpel are the outliers in that regard and all go for very distinct vibes. For Skalpel, it's vampiric decay. Even animation-wise, I think he has a lot more personality than most, especially compared to the plethora of other humanoids. He almost feels like the coffin's puppet. And that coffin is a very unique weapon that functions as a smashing tool, horror summoning box, Iron Maiden type torture device, and even a mount for the boss. Mechanically, it also provides grab attacks and lots of AoE goodness, and I like it. But my problem with the fight is the structure. He has a huge phase 1 health bar in which he can gain access to a more elaborate moveset, but only if you don't interrupt his big coffin riding special, which you really should since he regains health from it. But once again, the game does a terrible fucking job with communication. Intuitively, I figured if he can be interrupted from it, it would be by throwing a harpoon in his face while he's on the coffin, but that has no effect. What you need to do instead is hit the coffin, which takes quite a few hits before knocking him off. There's absolutely no visual indication that that's the way to go, especially when the move itself is the biggest run motherfucker attack ever designed. Phase 2 unlocks the full moveset, and while it was a shocking and surprising moment, now he's on constant life drain, so it ends pretty fast even with minimal engagement from you. So either you don't figure out the coffin gimmick and have a very long fight where it's up to RNG how often he gets to heal, or you do figure it out and get very little of the juicier moveset. Either way, it's going to be a cool boss, but one that leaves me either unsatisfied or exhausted. Finally, we get to move up to Great Tier, which took far longer than I initially expected upon completing the game. Viper onwards came very close, but upon replay they just don't hit the same, you know. If someone else thinks they deserve higher praise, I can absolutely understand it, just my preferences say they're not quite there. However, Blade Phantom, who also doesn't hit the same upon replay, doesn't have to, because I believe he was perfectly balanced for the skill level you're expected to be at by this early point in the game. As large of a moveset as he has, he starts extremely passive, slowly getting more and more aggressive as you ease into it. Also, keeping in mind your offensive abilities won't be well developed yet, the boss does the heavy lifting for the fun factor instead, with long combos, flashy as fuck moves, teleporting, and all sorts of bossiness.
Your body and soul.
Fittingly enough for Morgoth's voice actor, he's once again given the ability to conjure a whole bunch of weapons, giving him a varied toolkit with different combat styles all in one fight, including fists, spear, hammer, sword, two swords, and claws. He's a multi-tool edgelord and he revels in it. I wish there were more fights that lived up to the expectation of top-notch quality set by the Blade Phantom, but aside from the final boss, I think only Reese gets it. This is the last of Ozma's harem, one of the many spellcaster ladies, and presentation-wise she could easily blur with the others. Especially her first phase, which is just a defenseless target dummy. Her only worthwhile mechanic is creating magical walls that can combo pretty well with her AoEs, making positioning just a little trickier. But thank god she has a full health bar for phase 2, and it packs a punch and can take a punch. What she does better than the other mages is mixed range attacks with a very solid melee, without drawbacks from Ilyna's rapier rape, or dumb shit like Trokka's jellyfish dance, or the asshole Grim Reaper. She has some neat combo mix-ups, and I like the feel of her scythe and wing combos. There's something about the motion of the scythe that feels like it sort of flows with constant momentum, instead of being just boring one swing after another. It's like, dare I say, a dance. And I like rhythm in my deflect porn games. If there's anything to lament about, it's the lack of more dodge-only attacks and positioning in phase 2. Most of her spells are blockable, and even when the walls come back up, they tend to only get in the way of stun-locking her and preventing her own spells from reaching you. So not quite the perfect package that the number 1 boss in the game is. That of course being Ozma. I've been more negative here than I would have liked, and I'm sure many will find it disagreeable. So I hope this makes up for it, because fuck man, this boss is fantastic. Virtually everything good I've described about any of the bosses so far would also apply to Ozma. Good combos and variations of them, great balancing with how despite being able to do lengthy combos and attacks without much in the way of punish windows, he has other attacks where parrying or burst countering leaves him vulnerable long enough for you to go full Berserker on his ass and catch up. Good mix of melee and ranged spells. In fact, his phase 1 alone kinda dunks on all the other mages. It's not quite as strong as Reese with the melee moves, but far and above with the magical potency and position checks. And when I say he has position checks, I mean he has more than all the other bosses combined. Second form, while a little over-designed visually in my opinion, is where the fight goes from great to amazing. Great telegraphing with a little glow added to both explosions and his wings to help make out what you're meant to be looking at when he's attacking, as well as signal the timing. And while his chaos attacks are blockable, like most of them tend to be, they come at too great of a rate for you to parry all without the status effect build-up getting in your way, so you have to choose when to parry and when to dodge. It's also badass that you can lessen the amount of area denial when parrying certain moves, making that chaos trade-off potentially worth it. Your choices there will matter a lot because this is the most insane battle of attrition in the game, so you don't want that HP reduction chaos causes. Phase 1 alone is lengthy enough for a fight of its own, as is Phase 2. And then to make my jaw drop, it turns out there's even a third health bar. It's a long fucking fight and it earns its length with the amount of depth in the mechanics. And while I'm overall not that into Khazan's OST, Ozma's banger of a theme is crucial in selling the relentless adrenaline-fueled finale. This is one of the hardest bosses I have faced in a long time, and I'm so happy it's also one of the best. Does it have any flaws or drawbacks? For me, yes. With so many attacks in his arsenal, at least a couple of them are bound to be less fun than the rest. I think Phase 1 ground eruptions could use the same flash indicator later phases have. I don't really like the chaos nados that keep you off from him, or the big mid-phase missile barrage. But as far as problems go, these are pebbles, and the positives are a mountain. So overall, I again think Khazan's boss roster is pretty solid. Only one bad boss, one of the best bosses of all time, and varying levels of pretty good in between. What I think they did great was sound design, attack telegraphing, burst attacks, and reinforcing the dodge-deflect combat hybrid with unblockables in the mix. What I think they could improve on is balancing on some bosses, so RNG or miscommunication isn't as impactful, as well as said communication of weak spots and other gimmicks being better, more visual variety. Music is too subjective, so I'm not gonna say they need to improve on it, but again, I'd rather less epic choir for some bosses so it hits harder for when it really is earned. Bigger boobs for Trokka, and just adding a little more meat to some bosses that are already good but could be pushed further to be top-notch. If these guys can make Ozma, then I trust they can make the quality gap between him and the others not so big. As a whole, the game's pretty good, but almost at every turn I was reminded of how much better Neo 2 excels in most areas, especially weapons and aesthetics. But if this is these devs' Neo 1, then I can't wait to see what their Neo 2 would look like if they make it. Until then, I think the game you should play is War Thunder, of course! Because as a reminder, you can get a bonus pack by signing up using my link in the description or pinned comment, and if you're wondering what that pack contains, oh boy, it contains a lot of goodies like skins, free premium accounts for a week, and a Silver Alliance currency. So, thanks again War Thunder for the sponsorship, and thank you all for watching this video. I'll see you next time.